Good morning, West Coast, good afternoon, East Coast, and good evening, Switzerland and Europe. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Data Protecting the New Gold. My name is Lucas Sieber, and I'm Greater Zurich Area's Executive Director in the US. The Greater Zurich Area is a region, a beautiful region, as well as an organization, and the organization is dedicated to helping companies to invest in Switzerland, particularly in Zurich and surrounding region. We help international companies with their European evaluation and transition into Switzerland, and help them with introductions and, of course, detailed information on R&D, incentive programs, site tours, staffing, tax, government, business plan, and whatever is needed to expand a business into Switzerland. And all of that, that's the good news, is free of charge, as Greater Zurich Area enjoys broad support in Switzerland from the public as well as the private sectors. And you see some of the supporters here on the slide, and I would like to mention that Greater Zurich Area also works closely with some of Switzerland's key scientific institutions, including ETH in Zurich. To our webinar, we typically focus on pertinent issues that US companies might focus on when expanding into Europe. Today's topic is data, and this for a good reason. In recent times, we have seen quite an increase in requests from clients on data-related matters, such as the protection of physical and digital data. And we decided to dedicate a webinar to the topic in order to allow you to get a detailed update, as well as provide you with consolidated information on data storage in Switzerland. Today, we'll have the great opportunity to gain unique insights into the most secure data center in the world, and also get the legal context of data protection in Europe, particularly in Switzerland. In response to the exponential growth of data, Switzerland is repositioning itself to focus on the protection of physical and, of course, digital data stored in Swiss data centers. Its reputation for quality, stability, and, of course, neutrality are a big advantage when it comes to positioning itself among the best countries for storing the physical and digital data. And you might have noticed in recent months, there's quite a boom going on in terms of crypto, particularly Bitcoin. And all of these cryptographic assets need to be stored like data in data centers at some point in time. The arrival of cryptocurrencies means nothing else than transactions are moving from traditional banking infrastructure into data centers, and that's exactly where some of today's speakers come into place. We'll have a close look into one of the leading data storage facilities and find out about the legal framework behind data storage. But before I introduce today's speakers, let me do some housekeeping and acquaint you with what you see on your screen. To the left is the GoToWebinar viewer through which you can see the presentation. To the right is the control panel where you can raise your hand, ask questions, select audio mode, and so forth. We will have a Q&A at the end of both presentations. Please submit your questions directly in the panel to your right, or you can also use Twitter or any other social media platform. Just please make sure to use the hashtag GZA Webinar. On an additional note, we will record today's presentation and send you via email in the next 48 hours, and we'll also provide a YouTube link to today's presentation. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's first speaker. It is Frank Harzheim, CEO of Deltalis. Frank joined Deltalis as a CEO in September 2014. Besides the strategic development and the operational business of Deltalis, Frank is also in charge of the international positioning of the company as the Swiss hypersecure data center. Before Deltalis, Frank led the EMEA sales of data center infrastructure solutions at Emerson Network Power, and prior to that, he has held various management, sales, product strategy positions with international enterprises in the telecommunications and IT solutions market. Frank studied at the University of Applied Sciences in Aachen, Germany, having received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, and thereafter completed a master's at the Faculty of Economical Sciences at the University of Hagen with an emphasis on intercultural leadership. Frank, now it gives me great pleasure to seeing your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Lucas. I hope the screen can be seen now. My presentation can be seen.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So I have the pleasure to speak about Deltalis as one of the most secure data centers in the world, and I would like to give you a first introduction about the importance of physical security when it comes to data as well. And I want to share with you our journey from converting a military bunker into one of the most secure data centers you can find in the market. When it comes to security and data security, normally IT security is mainly referred to cyber risk or risk on application or network level. There are these very important threats defined by the Cloud Computing and Cloud Security Alliance. But before this level, on top level security, we have to ask us a few things about what is the basis for this. Actually, for example, where is the data physically located and stored? Where is it processed? Another question is who has access to the data? Another one is from where to where is data being sent? And all this comes then to the challenge to choose the right and ideal data center service provider, and of course the location, which should be ideal when choosing the data center which actually hosts your data. And all this together brings us to the point that physical security is basically a foundation of an end-to-end security concept. Without a physical security, any upper layer security is just one piece of the chain, and the chain can only be as strong as the weakest element. So physical security is actually where a full end-to-end security concept starts with. When a decision is being taken about who is my data center partner and what is data center solution, this decision has to be taken in a stable environment, ideally. Nowadays, we are in a situation worldwide which is far away from being stable and predictable. We are facing a European situation with some countries, or one country now, in fact, leaving the European community. Others thinking about it even. We have different international conflicts. We have other challenges, climate changes, and so on and so on. And this is far more than a stable environment, and where actually the importance of Switzerland starts to be. So when it comes to physical security, we all know the physical threats for data centers. We all know this. This is, water and IT, we know that are not the best friends. Fire, of course, gas, dust, explosions, attacks, and radiation, electromagnetic pulse, for example, is a very important threat coming along nowadays. Ideally, and we know all this, there are the following structures that should be at a minimum of 10 kilometers away from a data center. Ideally, these are, for example, civil and military airports, or oil facilities, chemical facilities, power stations, tank storages, and other dangers or source of danger and risk. Others should be ideally 5 kilometers away from a data center, which are, for example, urban environments, any known areas for demonstrations, weather and radar stations, broadcast facility, and so on. And although we know this, there are still data centers being built in urban environments. And this is, for example, a picture of a data center. You see the red circle, and this red circle is actually very close to a river. There are storage tanks, there's an underground railway, and you know, these are basically this is the fact where data centers are located. Also, we know about the risks and the physical risks of urban environments. This is an example of a data center being flooded, or an area being flooded, where all the data centers are in London. In London, we know that in the Docklands there are the most important data centers, and although we know this, we know about the risks. These data centers are located there. So what we did at Deltalis, actually, we saw the importance of physical security, and what we did, actually, we acquired one of the largest military bunkers of Switzerland and converted it into one of the most secure data centers in the world. This is then a few pictures that you can see here of our facility, and this was the military bunker of the Swiss Air Force, now hosting one of the most important and one of the most secure data centers worldwide. When it comes to Deltalis, and that is where I wanted to start talking about Switzerland, it's not only our facility, it's a combination of values. One value is the country where we are, and you remember one of the first slides that I showed where it's about stability. So this is where we actually run our data center. It is in Switzerland. Then, of course, our facility and the services that we provide. And talking about Switzerland as one of the most suitable countries for data centers worldwide. Actually, Switzerland was ranked in 2016 as one of the top 3 countries in the world with the lowest risks for data centers. This done by the Data Center Risk Index. We have a country which is positioning itself as a global center of storage for secure and sensitive data, with ideal conditions to support data center locations. We have a ideal geographic location with a very stable political situation and economic strength. We have very stable internal political systems, and we have a very solid and consistent legal and tax system. This is all about Switzerland, but where we are actually is a canton which is part of the greater Zurich area, just an hour away from Zurich, which is Uri. And one of the most important parts for data centers, of course, you need power and a very stable energy supply. And this is where Uri is very important. A canton in Switzerland producing a large amount of power, even more than it consumes itself, fully green and with hydroelectric source. We have excellent fiber connectivity. Actually, we are just around the corner of the internet backbone connecting Zurich to Milan. We are very centric in Europe with low latencies, again, away from threats of the urban environment, and just an hour away from one of the best connected airports, which is Zurich. Let us look at the facility itself. Basically, our facility wasn't made for data. It was made, for, very defense and critical situations, which is war scenarios. So it's very easy to say that it's indestructible and highly protected. It is nuclear proven and fully EMP protected. It is protected from any environmental impact and urban risks. It has state-of-the-art security access systems. We have a abundant power supply, starting with 8 mega V8, what we have right now, upgradable short-term even to 38, which is a very, very large power availability. We are fully redundant, 2N, N+1, with concurrent maintainability. We have multiple and diverse connectivity and connections to electricity and fiber networks. And our power is 100% local green certified. That was one part that we took as a decision as part of our vision to be sustainable, highly secure, and very much customer oriented as the vision of Deltalis. We are designed. We have
Frank, this is Lucas. I believe we lost connection, at least to the audio. We can't hear you anymore, therefore I suggest we quickly switch at this point and loop you in at the end again. So we try to fix the technical issues. Apologies for this. And perfect, yeah. Therefore, I suggest we quickly switch to Tim Hickman. Tim Hickman is a data protection lawyer with White Case located in the UK. And Tim advises on all aspects of UK and European Union privacy and data protection law, from general compliance issues to more specialized issues, pretty much everything from data breaches, structuring cross-border data transfers, complying with the rights to be forgotten, and so forth. Tim has a very detailed knowledge of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation and also co-authored White Case's handbook on the legislation, on the European Union's data legislation. Tim has significant experience of working with a wide range of clients in Europe as well as in the United States and Asia. He has also spent time on a secondment at Google, advising on cutting-edge privacy and data protection issues internally. Tim, now it gives me great pleasure to hand over the floor to you.
Tim, you have to quickly unmute yourself. You're still muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, all fine.
Perfect. Okay. So thanks, everyone, and apologies for not working the mute correctly. So my name is Tim. I'm a lawyer at White Case in London. And obviously, the starting point for any discussion involving a UK lawyer on EU data protection law at the moment is, well, why is the guy from the country that's leaving the EU talking to people about EU data protection law? Which is a perfectly fair question. So to start with, we are at the moment looking at a situation where the UK is going to leave the EU at the end of March 2019. And there are really two things that are relevant here. First, notwithstanding the fact that the UK is leaving the EU, the GDPR will continue to apply to us. And secondly, although I am an English lawyer, I'm also an Irish lawyer, so I remain an EU lawyer even after Brexit. So I promise I'm not wasting your time with all of this. So to begin with then, where are we? What is the current legal framework across the EU? And then we'll look a little bit at how it affects Switzerland as well. The starting point is that EU data protection law is based on Directive 95/46, which is, as the name suggests, written in 1995. It is an EU directive that is essentially designed to impose common rules regarding the processing of personal data on anyone in the EU who does anything with any information about individuals. The key principles that the law introduces are, first of all, the idea that processing must be fair and lawful. This essentially means that you have to be honest with people about what you're doing with their data. And then also the idea that you must keep personal data secure. This is the idea that you are responsible for ensuring that you do not suffer a data breach, and that you ensure that nobody unauthorized gets into your data, which is, of course, why it is worthwhile considering a secure hosting facility such as that being described by Frank. But the law is going to change, and on the 25th of May next year, so just over 5 months away, we're going to have this new law, the EU General Data Protection Regulation. Now, the General Data Protection Regulation is important for a number of reasons. The two key drivers behind this law were the fact that we've seen rapid technological change over the last 20 years since the 1995 directive was written. We've seen the development of massive reliance on networked systems and the fact that the way that we use data has fundamentally changed. So whereas in 1995, data was thought of as something that sits on an insurance company's mainframe, nowadays data is something that I have on my mobile phone and I can send terabytes of it to Japan with the click of a button. That kind of world really hadn't been envisioned in 1995 when the existing law was written. If you think about 1995, it was a world where there was no Snapchat, there was no Facebook. We didn't even have Google in 1995. So the law as written at the moment was created for a world that is very different to the world that we have now. The other problem we have with the current law is that the way that EU member states implement directives is that they take the law written in the directive and pass it through their own national parliament, and the national parliament implements the principles from the directive, but it does not necessarily do so in a consistent manner across the whole of the EU. So you have the UK and Ireland taking, shall we say, slightly more pragmatic, business-friendly views of some of these principles, and you have, for example, Germany, Austria, the Nordics taking slightly more protective of individuals kind of approaches. So at the moment, we have this patchwork of similar but inconsistent legal requirements across the EU. And one of the things that this General Data Protection Regulation is designed to do is to smooth out some of those inconsistencies. There are a lot of issues in the General Data Protection Regulation, and we can't possibly do justice to all of them in a single talk. So what we're going to do here is look at some of the biggest and most challenging ones. The biggest is that we've got a number of requirements that apply in other jurisdictions outside the EU. So we see, for example, that the GDPR applies extraterritorially. It applies outside the EU. This means that if you are a business in Switzerland and you are subject to the GDPR, so if you offer services into the EU, or if you process the personal data of EU residents whilst offering them services or whilst monitoring their behavior, then the chances are that you will be subject to the GDPR. Another key challenge with the GDPR is that there are significant new fines. And the reason why this matters is that the law that's written at the moment imposes relatively low fines. The GDPR looks at that and says, well, hang on a second, businesses are largely not paying attention to the law as currently written, and the reason for that is that, frankly, the fines are just too low. So the only way to fix that is to increase the maximum fines so that businesses will now pay attention. So what happened was that the European Commission and the European Parliament proposed significantly greater fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of worldwide turnover. Those are obviously very, very large numbers, and the sorts of things that will keep lots of chief financial officers awake at night. And so one of the key issues here is, how do you make sure that your business is not in the firing line for that kind of fine? And that's the sort of thing that we're going to look at as we progress through the rest of this talk. So having looked then a little bit at the key changes that the GDPR introduces, it's now important to look at Brexit, because obviously many of your businesses will have customers in the UK, will have clients in the UK, will have people that you do business with in the UK, service providers, financial organizations. And one of the things about Brexit is that it's going to make it much harder to transfer data from the EU to the UK. But it doesn't necessarily create a problem for Switzerland. And the reason for that is this. The UK at the moment is an EU member state, but on the 29th of March 2019 at midnight Brussels time, the UK will cease to be an EU member state and will become what is known as a third country for the purposes of EU data protection law. The reason why that matters is that once the UK becomes a third country, the GDPR will say that it is no longer lawful to transfer data from the European Union to the United Kingdom unless the transferor, so the business in the EU, has a legal basis for doing so. And it's quite challenging to do that because you either need to put in place contracts with the entity in the UK to ensure that it will process data that it receives in accordance with EU law, or you need to put in place some other way of protecting the data. Alternatively, the UK will need to come to the European Commission and say, right, well, now that we've concluded those wonderfully successful negotiations, please could you give us an adequacy decision so that data can lawfully be transferred from the EU to the UK without the need for additional protections. And given how well the negotiations are going at the moment, I think we can fairly accurately predict that the European Commission will respond, thanks very much, don't call us, we will call you. So it is highly likely that the UK may not receive an adequacy decision from the European Commission, at least not immediately. But, and here's the interesting point, Switzerland already has an adequacy decision. It is at the moment perfectly lawful to send data from the EU to Switzerland without any kind of additional protections. Swiss data protection law then says that you can send data from Switzerland to a recipient in another jurisdiction if that jurisdiction is on Switzerland's whitelist. All of the EEA member states, including at the moment the United Kingdom, are on Switzerland's whitelist, but curiously, membership of the whitelist does not appear to be dependent upon membership of the European Union or the European Economic Area. In other words, on the 29th of March 2019 at midnight Brussels time, when the UK ceases to be an EU member state, there is no automatic legal trigger that will cause the UK to leave Switzerland's whitelist. This means that you can lawfully send data from Switzerland to the UK even after Brexit, when you may not be able to lawfully send data from the EU to the UK. So Switzerland is in a unique position there in terms of being a good place to store data, because you can get at the data lawfully from both the UK and the EU without necessarily having any kind of data transfer issue. Obviously, the specifics of any data transfer will vary from case to case, and you should obviously seek legal advice on those topics. But it is worth bearing in mind that Switzerland has this unique position. It is worth also bearing in mind that the European Commission might decide to give the UK an adequacy decision. There's nothing to prevent them. But the closing point on this is that they have no obligation to do so. The UK can go to the European Commission and say, please, can we have an adequacy decision? And the Commission is entirely free to ignore that request or just say no. The advantage of the Swiss position is, number one, Switzerland already has one of those decisions. And number two, Switzerland, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is in the process of updating its data protection laws to ensure that it will continue to maintain an adequacy decision following the implementation of the GDPR. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the impact of this law on businesses, and then we're going to come back and have some time for Frank to wrap up before we turn to a Q&A. In terms of looking at the GDPR, it's important to bear in mind that EU data protection law, and the GDPR in particular, applies to everything that your business does with personal data. And even if you are just a business-to-business operation, you will still be processing some personal data in relation to your own employees and so on. And while the GDPR is not directly effective in Switzerland, obviously, as many of you will be aware, Switzerland is in the process of updating its own data protection law to essentially match many of the GDPR principles. So it would be wise for Swiss businesses, if they do business with the EU or the UK, or even if they don't, to be aware of what the GDPR requires, because the same requirements are likely to come in Switzerland. The second thing is that a lot of businesses really haven't paid attention to the issue of data protection, or at least not as much attention as they should have over the past 15, 20 years, because the cost of compliance has been too high, and the value of any applicable fine has just been too low. The GDPR is obviously going to change that, not by reducing the cost of compliance, that's still going to be expensive, but by making it much, much more expensive to be non-compliant by raising the value of the fines. It's also worth noting that there is a provision in the GDPR in Article 58, paragraph 2F, that allows a data protection authority to step in and say, we are issuing a temporary or definitive ban on processing. That sounds very legalese. What it means is a data protection authority in any EU member state can decide that it does not like what your business is doing with personal data, and it can issue you with an instruction to stop doing that until it is satisfied that your business is compliant with the GDPR. In other words, a regulator can come into your marketing team on the 26th of May, or more likely the 28th, because I think the 26th is a Saturday, come into your business on the 28th of May and say, right, we think that your marketing team is illegally marketing to people, and until you fix that, we are going to issue a ban on processing. Your marketing operation must shut down until you have satisfied us that you are compliant with the GDPR. Now, admittedly, some EU member states already have that power and have used it only very sparingly, but nevertheless, it is a clear risk that that power will now apply throughout the European Union. So big challenges to watch out for there. The next thing to think about is that knowing where your business stores data is critical to compliance. Unless you have a good idea of who has your data and where the data are, you are really going to struggle to be compliant with the GDPR or Swiss data protection law going forward. One of the biggest advantages, obviously, of storing data in Switzerland, in addition to all the points I made about the physical location of the data and being able to transfer the data internationally, one of the biggest advantages of being in Switzerland is obviously security. Frank has talked a lot about this, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but it is worth bearing in mind that there are facilities like the one offered by Deltalis that offer very, very secure storage that don't suffer from some of the drawbacks that you have in other jurisdictions. The other thing is that doing this right can actually be a competitive advantage. Many businesses are currently only looking at data protection compliance as a disadvantage, but many of their customers are now coming and saying, well, we want to know what you're doing on GDPR compliance, on Swiss data protection compliance, because unless we know the answer to those things, it's very difficult for us to trust your business with our clients' data. So as a result of that, a lot of businesses are saying, well, there's customer demand for us to be compliant with the GDPR and with Swiss data protection law. So if we can be the first company to market, if we can be the first ones to go and say to our customers convincingly, we have thought about all these issues, here is the plan that we put in place to ensure that what we do with your data is completely compliant, you can generate an enormous amount of customer and user trust by ensuring that your customers and users understand that you are a business who will take responsible, compliant actions regarding your use of their data. So, what should you do next? Well, the first thing is don't wait for guidance. There has been some guidance already issued by European regulators, but frankly, there is enough information out there to get started. If you are not already working on improving data protection compliance, the likelihood is that you should be. The second thing is plan out how compliant you want to be. Both the GDPR and the revised Swiss law impose principles on businesses that are very hard to comply with. Lots of them will require your business to take decisions that are pretty challenging. So rather than looking at this as something where you need to hit 100% compliance, try and work out exactly how much you have in terms of time and resources and allocate those things efficiently to make sure that you are at least able to manage your risks down so that you are not the highest target for the relevant data protection authority to come after. it's also worth thinking about the fact that GDPR compliance and compliance with the new Swiss law, these things are not a one-off tick box exercise. It is not as though you can file a form and you're done with it. They are ongoing. And the reason for that is that as technology develops, every time we implement a new software system within our business, we are faced with this challenge of working out whether or not that software system involves doing something new with information. And anytime it does, and anytime that new thing involves information about people, we have to turn again and say, well, okay, does this affect our data protection compliance? So it's an ongoing journey, not a one-off activity. Now, you also need to be thinking, as we discussed previously, about where you should store your data. If you have data across the EU at the moment, think about whether that's still a good idea under the GDPR. Are you exposing yourselves to fines in more than one EU member state? Or are you needlessly holding data in jurisdictions that are likely to be high risk from an enforcement perspective? Have a look at those kinds of things. The last couple of points on this slide 12 before I wrap up are these. The first one is you've got to make sure that you understand where you have compliance gaps. And the reason for that is if you ever end up in a situation where an EU data protection authority wants to talk to you about compliance, you want to be able to tell them where you might have already gone wrong so that you can convince them that you have a plan for fixing it. Your aim in discussions with data protection regulators is to convince them that they don't need to spend taxpayers' money on getting you to comply because you are already compliant. The last point, and it seems obvious, is this. You should seek advice. There is a lot of really good advice available out there on compliance with these laws. I'm sure there will be more coming, but a lot of the regulators provide really good guidance. The Article 29 Working Party, which is an EU body, also provides good guidance. At some point, you will probably reach a point where you need to find some lawyers or consultants to advise you on data protection. And at that point, what we recommend is you should ask your lawyers or your consultants for free stuff. And I don't mean ask them for brochures or marketing materials. I mean, ask them for free things that will genuinely make your life easier. And the reason why we say that is this. If you are looking at hiring an advisor, a lawyer, whoever, to advise you on this topic, and they don't already have a large volume of free information that's genuinely useful that they will share with you up front, then ask yourself why you should be the company to pay for them to develop those things. On the other hand, if they already have those things, the likelihood is that they, like White Case, for example, have been doing this law for the last 10 years and have a large amount of experience and are therefore more than happy to share general compliance information because they know that the value to your business is not in knowing what the law says, but in knowing what your business specifically needs to do about it. So, with that in mind, White Case offers an exceptionally detailed handbook on the General Data Protection Regulation, and we give it away for free. There's a link in the slides, or you can Google the words GDPR handbook, and the first result that comes up that isn't an ad is our handbook. So with that, I will hand back over to Lucas and to Frank if he's back on, and then we'll be more than happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's very, very impressive and detailed. Really appreciated your presentation. Let's quickly see if Frank is back and able to wrap up his presentation. Frank, are you back in line?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yeah, loud and clear. We just quickly switch the presentation to your screen and allow you to finish. All right, here we go.
Apologies again. I do not know what happened actually. So I was there at that slide showing our facility and inside of the facility. So we have these 3 independent buildings. Everything you see here on that slide, it's inside the mountain. So to get there, we have 2 entrances. We have one for regular visits and another one for the larger deliveries. And we have started our deployment in the 3rd building that you see there, which is called data center rooms. That's where we actually started. To get there, we have a multi-layer security concept. So many barriers have to be taken. Everything is batched and personalized, so customer can be tracked as well completely when he goes to his racks, and all the racks are completely only be opened by the authorized customer or client or technician. We have our own mountain water reservoir that I mentioned before, 700 liter, that we use for primary cooling to be very efficient and brings us to a PoE, which is just a very good, very efficient PoE, the power utilization. And here we have the diesel reservoir that we have in order to make sure that we run the data center completely autonomous. Our diesel engines are, so you see, all critical elements are inside the mountain. Our services that we provide, basically, we start with very standardized and common shared co-location. So there we offer quarter, half, full racks, cages, and so on. But then we start very, dedicated private co-location. As I said, private cages in a co-location environment, and from there, very customized co-locations or data center rooms. We are able to build own rooms based on customer specifications, fully compliant with what the customer is asking for. We see very recently a lot of, we are recently very often approached by, especially by cryptocurrency companies. They need data centers that are far beyond the normal security standards. And as the Canton Zug is just around the corner of where we are, is positioning themselves as the crypto valley in Switzerland, we are just a perfect fit for those companies to host their cryptocurrency businesses. We have hyper-secure vaults. This is what I said just before about cryptocurrency wallets. That is very, very top secure here. We have rooms within rooms that we design, that we construct based on the design of our customers. We are fully flexible regarding power. Our power that we provide normally for a rack is around about 3 kilowatt per rack. This is average, but it goes up to high density. We have special high density rooms where we provide very high density power to the racks if the customer needs this. Our connectivity services are multiple and diverse fiber connection and cross connects with meeting rooms in the data center itself. And on top, we have value-add services like the supervision of the infrastructure on-site, technical support, logistical services, security 24/7, and remote management, and even data center infrastructure management as a service. So basically everything which is needed to offer that a customer is not necessarily obliged to come on site for any, let's say, maintenance or whatever. Everything can be done by us or remotely. This is my last slide, just showing our certifications. We are a highly certified company and data center, starting with ISO 27001, of course. One of those certifications, accreditation that we achieved is a full electromagnetic pulse protection of the facility itself. So we are one of the few data centers, I would say, worldwide that are certified EMP protected. We have a Eurocloud 5-star certification. Of course, we are a pure Swiss made service and quality company. We have 100% certified power from renewable sources, and we are PCI compliant as well. As an association, we are a member of the VG Swiss Group, which is a group of companies that provide pure Swiss services in the data center and IT market. That's basically my presentation. I'm happy to answer any question that may arise.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Frank, for your presentation. Thank you also, Tim, two excellent and very insightful presentations. We received a number of questions. Let me tackle some of them. The first one goes to both of you. The first part probably to Tim and the second to Frank. So given your presentation, Tim, Switzerland might expect quite an increase in demand for data storage starting end of May 2019. Tim, is this correct? And if yes, Frank, are we prepared for that? So first to Tim, would you agree that Switzerland might expect an increase in demand for secure data storage and compliant data storage? Tim, I believe you're muted.
There we go. So I think the challenge with Brexit really is uncertainty. And in times of uncertainty, companies tend to put assets in places where they know they are secure. And one of the advantages of Switzerland, obviously, is that it has a very stable relationship with the European Union, and that it is politically very stable and militarily neutral. So when everything becomes uncertain, as it does inevitably in March 2019 with Brexit, the likelihood is that a lot of companies will be looking for somewhere secure to put their data, and Switzerland is the obvious candidate.
Sounds great. Thank you, Tim. Then, Frank, among the questions we received was also, how much capacity you guys have available. How much prepared is Deltalis and probably peers of yours in Switzerland if we think about the 2019 with an increased demand for services such as the ones offered by Deltalis? What is your estimation?
Well, Switzerland has seen.
Frank, I think we lost you again. I can't hear you, so let me tackle the next question we got for Tim. What OECD countries are not on Switzerland's whitelist?
That's a really good question. I don't have a copy of the whitelist in front of me, unfortunately, so I would have to look it up. But the whitelist is available from the Swiss Data Protection Authority, so it's publicly available on the internet. All
right. That should do it. With Google in place, pretty much everyone should be able to retrieve that information. Let me try to bring Frank back in. Frank, can you hear us? That doesn't seem to be the case. All the rest of the questions were pretty much in terms of physical data centers. So looking at the time, we're already about 5 minutes over. Thank you so much to Tim. Thank you so much to Frank for a great presentation, for very useful and hands-on insights when it comes to bringing data into Europe and particularly into Switzerland. Thank you so much to the audience. Thank you so much for listening to today's webinar. And please stay tuned for our email with the download link. And of course, you can see all of the content which we provided today at a later point. Thank you so much and see you next year again. Thanks. Bye.